Hi, it's Jeff. I need one more person to help me with this fundraiser. You in? Awesome. Thanks. Okay, hang on one second. I'll Zoom you. Okay, bye. Mr. Bill Irwin.
Yes, sir. So happy to be with you guys.
Thank you so very much.
You're in Mendocino, California. It means a lot to me, and I'm envious of you.
Well, you were like one of the first people I rushed to tell we had bought a house up in Mendocino. I came running backstage to find you at ACT, and then I went, we got a house, we got a house.
Well, greetings from the very center of New York City.
So how has quarantine been treating you? And how are you been doing it? How's it been treating you? How have you been treating it? What have you been doing?
Oh, we try to stay busy. Theater dogs, we always need a sled to pull. So the heaviest of quarantine lightened up after we were the epicenter, and then we weren't anymore. And in fact, numbers have been good here, although they're on the rise again. So we can tell that we're going to need to hunker down further. We may reinstitute, this is just me talking, I don't know, but maybe the city will reinstitute the 7 o'clock salute to first line responders. It was a really important thing during March, April, May. Then the city wisely sort of said, okay, let's not let it dribble out. Let's suspend it. And
have you been managing to do any work during all this time? I mean, or me as a designer, I've been pretty much wiped out, so I don't know when I'm going to be working again. What about you? Well,
the theater is like a weed, you can't kill it. And has it reemerged as television via the internet? I don't know. There's something still intrinsically theatrical about what theater people are doing, but we're doing it all almost entirely virtually. Although I did get out in something called the Busking Project, and I teamed up with a wonderful theater about 2 blocks that way called the Vineyard Theater. And so at 22nd and Broadway, for certain times, 3 shows a night, we were doing something I was just calling a busking set, 10 minutes of outdoor stuff,
There it is.
Trying to make something happen and connect live. People had to stand on socially distanced audience spots. It was very moving and very engaging. And there was a kind of letdown when that ended, although that went right into the next thing, which was the shooting of a piece of theater called On Beckett. And On Beckett is something I've been working at for a while. It has certain roots back in San Francisco at ACT. Carrie Perloff is a great nurturer of On Beckett. So now it's happened various theaters around the country. Here at the Irish Rep Theater, we were supposed to be at the Galway Festival in Ireland this past summer. We're going to hope for next summer, although you can't assume anything. Yeah. But we shot it virtually on the stage of the Irish Repertory Theater. The protocols, if we observed them properly, eased up enough so that we could actually get together and shoot something socially distanced from each other. And that is on the Irish Repertory website. And we're calling it now On Beckett in Screen, because we tried to rethink it for this between human beings.
So tell me a little bit about this picture. This is of course the one, we've the famous shot there of you with your head in the screen there. And I ask because, it seems like screens, iPads, whatever, I remember from old hats. I mean, you started very early with all that. So it made total sense to me when I heard you and Chris Fitzgerald were getting together to do that in Zoom for the Old Globe. And that, I think that was like one of the earliest kind of performance pieces on this thing called Zoom.
I think it may have been. It was among the early ones, and it feels now, of course, like a period piece.
Is there anything? How did that go? I mean, what can you say? I don't want you to say anything you can't say, of course, but because I remember there was 2 takes, at least that I saw.
Well, that's one thing you could say. In early Zoom, theater people and the public theater here in New York led the way in many ways, and the Old Globe, Lord bless them, said, we have this beautiful theater in the middle of a beautiful park in San Diego. It's closed. How nimble can we be? But the early thought was you have to do it like live, like theater. And it became like live television, although twice as fraught with challenges and dangers. So yes, right in the middle of our live Zoom cast that we'd been working on for a week, Chris Fitzgerald's computer went dead. He said, I let my son do his homework on it. I don't know.
Oh,
but
dear.
we never had an explanation. We just knew we had to stop and start. People kept saying, "Oh, you guys, you made it part of you playing that."
So I remember seeing him freeze, right? And then I remember you like you added freezes in later in the show. Were those freezes always planned to be there, or was that in reaction to the freeze that happened?
Such a good question. They were always planned. In fact, early on, we thought, okay, we'll do a thing where I'm in this window and he's in that window and we'll talk. And can you guys at the other end out in San Diego there? We said, can you make us freeze? And they did, Lord bless them. But then there was an audio problem after that. And they said, okay, we'll catch up with the audio. And suddenly Fitzgerald and I looked at each other. I mean, virtually, we looked at each other. Wait a minute, we're clowns. Yeah. How about if we do the freezes? So it became a rumination on talking on Zoom. And Fitzgerald was much better at it than I, but we both had our freeze moments. And then in live Zoomcast, there was a real freeze, and it goes on from there.
This all leads to, theaters around the world are, struggling to figure out how to stay alive, just, financially, but also artistically during this, and Mendocino Theater Company, no different than anybody else. Would you, with your experience, do you think Zoom is a satisfying place for this? Do you think that, do you think this is, a good way for us to keep going and trying to stay in touch with our audiences, artistically? Any advice you have based on this experience?
Do not look to me for advice. But I'll tell you this, I'm glad it exists. I'm glad we're jumping on it. I can't wait till it's a footnote in history.
Yeah.
We look back at it. Although I'll tell you something interesting, Jeff, I was curious to know what your vantage is from out there in Northern California. But I think that this distance stuff has been accelerated greatly, of course, by the pandemic, but it was always lurking there and it was beginning. So I think no matter what our pandemic status, we're going to be doing a lot of this. I want us back in theaters, as soon as possible. But this kind of working, rehearsing, maybe, certainly auditioning. Actors, get ready for this to be your sole audition medium. We did a reading on Zoom yesterday here in New York. Everyone was in New York, but we were all on our Zoom. A wonderful, weird, strong, maybe classic lost gem of a play called Trouble in Mind from 1955. It's one that you guys should look at out there. It's a play. Its quick history is it was done in 55 off Broadway, like down in the Village, became a huge hit. People couldn't get into the little theater. Let's move it to Broadway. They went to move it to Broadway. The producers wanted changes for the ending, which is, when you read the play, you'll see is exactly what the play itself is about. And the playwright, the first African-American woman playwright to have a play about to move on to Broadway, said, no, we won't change it. And it has not been done in New York for 65 years since then. The Zoom is a marvelous tool. Thank God we had it when the pandemic, 10 years ago, would have been a whole different thing, but it's not quite theater.
Speaking of theater, let's talk a little bit. How old were you when your parents moved to Mendocino?
I think I was 21.
Let's talk a little bit about what you remember of that, of those years. And your dad, Ace, was deeply involved in the theater company and in, it seems like, lots of arts events around on the coast.
Well, you asked me to talk a little, and I will try to talk a little. You may have to shut me up. I remember first going up to your part of the world there from Southern California, and to my surprise, my folks were talking about moving themselves up there, and it was gorgeous. It was glorious. It was a little too, for me in that moment in my life, it was a little too unpopulous. I needed to be in San Francisco where, there were bodies to make a theater. Little did I know how strong the theater is and what can exist in a community like yours. So yeah, my folks moved there. My mother went into gerontology and senior citizen life and support. She was becoming a senior citizen, and she ran a senior citizen center, which dovetailed often with the theater. The same people who were helping her build things there at the senior citizen center were building sets, often with my father. So my father, Horace Glenn Irwin, as he was named, some point when in my teenagehood, he became Ace because he always hated the name Horace. Apparently my grandmother said, well, you'll name Liz is pregnant with your first baby, you'll name him Horace. He said, absolutely not. Kid will be William or something like that, but you're not going to be Horace. And so Ace Irwin, yeah, fell in with the company there. Fantastic little shoebox. The greatest sightlines, because almost everybody in every seat is saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Shoney is just like a great.
Straight in there.
Straight in there. Straight in there. And my father designed many sets. He acted occasionally with the greatest trepidation. He was so full of stage fright.
You know, Diane Larson is one of the resident designers there, and she always talks, just so fondly of Ace, calls him, her mentor, as does Mervyn Gilbert, who, has been around forever. And, he did a lot of things. He designed and built this this orchestra shell for the music festival that lasted there for years. And I think you said something about how that was, your mom was involved with that too.
Everybody who, got within striking distance of their house there was involved. Ace drew things, he'd been a draftsman. That's how he entered the aerospace industry during the Second World War. He told stories about they were drafting and cutting out pieces to build airplanes with camouflage overhead in Santa Monica, California, because they were sure they were going to be bombed. His drawing for his own creations was always a little shortchanged because of the need for speed. So you'd look down and there was some chalk on a piece of plywood, and you realize, oh, that's what Ace is working off of. He has some ribs, and this is going to become a shell. And when he first trucked it all over to the headlands there and put it up, my mother and I couldn't believe it. He said, oh, this is what we've been working on. Okay, Ace, whatever. Yeah, tell me, give me the next thing. It all sort of opened out into that shell that they did use for many years, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, I hear about how he engineered and built tracking interchangeable flat system for the theater that was used for many shows, and arches with pop-out windows and things like that. And he just kept working and working and working and working. They finally had to take the hammer out of his hand and say, just sit there and tell us what to do.
There was a point at which the power saw in the garage, my father had macular degeneration. So he had, the center of his vision was less and less present. So he'd work more and more like this. And he was using a power saw with a piece of ply, a piece of 2x4 that he would feed it through. And we finally said, yeah, unplugging that. And we have to move it down to somebody else's house because, yeah, you can't keep running that. But he did. And he had a way of, even with his partial vision, sort of with his hands describing what he saw. My father, all his life, right up to the end of his life, and he died 4 years ago at 100 years old, he said, I kind of wish I could make it go away, but it's just part of me. I lay there and I can't quite sleep, but I'm designing things in my mind. He designed a thing that got himself up and out of bed at the end of his life. He
sort of like Wallace and Gromit, exactly like the, drops him down for breakfast and all that stuff. That's funny.
Yeah.
Now you did some benefits for your mom's clinic.
Yes, the Pickle Family Circus came back in what I think would be the 70s. And we did things at Cotton Auditorium and out in the field.
My housekeeper, Paula Cohen, right?
Yeah.
Yes, worked with and for your mom and did a lot of these benefits and with you. And she retired a couple of years ago.
But I'm going to give a shout out to Paula Cohen since you mentioned her, Jeff. Our family is so indebted to her family, the Bloxham Cohens. Paula's mother-in-law had a house in the woods that she wasn't using, and that meant that when we came, any of us Irwins came to visit our folks, we could count on the Blocks and Cohens, a place to stay, a couch, sometimes a whole bedroom. And when you ask me, what do you think of when you think of Mendocino? Well, the gorgeous coastline. Everybody I ever meet in New York said, you have to go to that part of the world someday. You have to see that. But also the community, thinking of how you'd pick up a phone, and my mother never hesitated, said, Paula, Aurora, hello, can you? And people helped each other. It makes me, sitting here in the middle of New York, which is also a community where people help each other, but I think really, really deeply and profoundly and fondly of your community there.
Thank you. That'll mean a lot to a lot of people.
I hope all is well. I hope all are well. I mean, time moves us all onward, so I know people come, people go, but I hope things go well there for you guys.
Thank you. And thanks for taking time out of your schedule today.
Thanks for those photos. I'm misting up there, looking at some of the photos of my folks, of my brother and sister, Mendocino.
We love you. Take care.
You do the same. Take care out there.
Will do.